Welcome to Driven, the Unscripted Success podcast, with your hosts, Mike Menino and Nariman Hamden, bringing you insights and stories on achieving personal, professional, and financial success.
Hey guys, I'm Nariman Hamden, and this is Driven, Unscripted Success podcast. We have an awesome guest on today. We have Andrew Chrostowski. Andrew has been in the technology space for over 20 years. His expertise is in leadership, innovation, and business strategy. He is a dynamic leader, NACD certified director and advisor. He's been on boards, and I believe he currently is on a board. He hosts the Connected Workers podcast, where he dives into the future of work. He is an engaging speaker, innovative technologist, and safety advocate. He crafts strategies to to thrill in a digital world. How you doing, Andrew? Come on in.
Great. I'm
Good.
doing great, Norman. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. So I see you are a Floridian as well. Not a native. Neither one of us are, but you're living here in Naples as well.
Yes, and loving it. Yep. I am a refugee from the Seattle area. And I know you've come down here from Michigan, so it's...
Yes. We both sought refuge. We are COVID refugees.
Okay.
So how about you kick off things by telling us about a big win early in your career and what you think pushed you over the finish line?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I'll tell you about the most transformative process. So I spent the early part of my career as a research physicist in the United States Air Force. So I was doing command control, communications, intelligence, and then space-based systems. So I got very interested in systems problems and working through, what was really complex, on the edge of impossible to do kind of problems. And I got a reputation for trying to solve these tough technical problems in these large programs that were going on. And I approached it early on, as you would expect from someone who's a physicist and an engineer and a guy with a master's in systems management. I'm thinking about, okay, what rules of physics are we trying to bend here? How is we going to make this program work? And what I discovered quickly was that was not the issue. It was always people, right? The reason something was behind schedule, the reason something was not coming together in these large complex programs was almost never just the technical issues. It was that people weren't collaborating, working together, and being a team. And so that realization early on in my career shaped me for the rest of all the challenges I would face in both military and civilian situations. Is that that leadership? It's about leadership and taking people beyond where they are operating currently to the state they need to be in.
Sure, and that's got to have its challenges in itself, and in guiding them, in pushing them and encouraging them, to push themselves, and because you see what they're capable of, they just need a little bit of encouragement in that. So I'm sure that was an interesting process to have to go through.
It was,
So,
and again, it's been true in every industry I've come into. It's always, and I can tell a lot of great stories about how people, who are in the organizations and sometimes many levels down the organization really have the answers for some of the biggest problems that those companies are facing, and they just haven't been able to leverage it because they have the wrong culture, the wrong respect for the frontline worker, which is something I've taken forward through my career, in every role I've had.
sure. So how do you deal with taking risks? Is there a time when you took on a massive risk and rolled the dice, and it's really worked out for you?
Mhm. Well, I'll tell just an anecdote and then maybe try to talk about the story of risk itself. What stuck with me in my career, and I was working for Schick Wilkinson Swords. So think of the shaving products group, right? So shaving foam, razors, and blades, fast-moving consumer products, number 2 in the world. And I had created their new product development process from scratch when I went there as the head of global quality, and we took their development of a new razor system from 4 years down to about 14 months. And so we did 3 $100 million brands in 4 years, which was unheard of for them. But
Impressive.
one of the young women who was on one of these teams that we developed, right, to go with that, was quitting. She was a very talented engineer. She was quitting, and I went to try to talk her out of leaving the organization. She said, "Well, look, management, really didn't, wasn't transparent with me. They said that they were not, risk averse. They encouraged me to take risks in managing things. They didn't tell me they were failure intolerant, and
Oh, geez.
that is huge when you think about, okay, organizations who are going to, drive risk, but they're going to be failure intolerant. And I've never forgotten that. And we lost that young lady from the organization, and she went on to have a great career and still doing really well. But that stuck with me. And so when I got into more senior positions of leadership, right, when I was leading organizations, when I thought about the risk profile, right, of an organization, I started with the idea: do we have the culture that, okay, we're going to encourage these risk taking, but are we going to then be failure tolerant in order to make sure that we reward that risk taking behavior? And that was something we implemented when I was working for George Oliver at Tyco, and he was great at implementing that and making sure that we took people who took chances on these programs, and then actually with a failure of their program, actually promoting them into another role because of the effort and the things that they had organized for it.
Sure. And I mean, and if you're not failing, then how are you succeeding? Because you're not trying, you know? So, I mean, if failure is not allowed whatsoever, then how do you take risks? How do you grow? How do you become innovative?
Exactly.
So yeah, I could see how that was a challenge. And it's unfortunate that that lady ended up leaving, but as you said, she ended up having a great career. Um, so that's very good. So what skills or habit you think doesn't get enough credit for contributing to your success?
You know what? I think for me, it's this idea that your organization's performance will always regress to the level of its systems. Okay, so you can make a lot of effort. You can be that leader that goes out there and encourages 110%, and everybody throws in, and you can make things happen for a short period of time. Right? You can stress the organization, you can burn people out, you can do a lot of things in that space, but ultimately, to make a superior, sustainable business, right, that's based on performance, you've got to have this ability to really engage with people and put systems in place that eliminate the variability in quality and production and and the customer experience, all of those things. So to me, people don't give enough credit to the systems that you put in place is what drives the ultimate sustainable performance of the organization.
Sure, sure. It's obviously staying on top of any field is tough. What's something exciting you see on the horizon in your industry, and how are you getting ready for it?
Well, look, everybody's talking about AI today, and I think
Yes.
it's appropriate, right? One of the boards I sit on is called Rugged Edge. They're a device manufacturer, so think of a gateway, an internet gateway and IoT system that is intrinsically safe, can go in explosive atmosphere. You can toss it in the river, pull it back out, and it's still going to work. You can take it into explosive atmospheres, and it's going to function. That idea of having a cognitive companion and an expert in your ear when you're connected as a frontline worker is huge. It's going to change the game, right? Whereas we've had a lot of experience with trying to put information and connect people at the desk, for the desk workers. So like we're talking here on Zoom, where we're dealing with Microsoft Teams, there's people are used to having that productivity and that access. What people aren't used to is the 2 billion people that go to work every day out there without being connected, without being in a desk, and giving those people access to AI that's going to become a cognitive companion and really provide answers in a way that's just never been possible before. And that's going to be really important because of the demographic shifts we're seeing in the workforce, right? Fewer workers are going to be available, right? We see the population collapses in first world countries are going forward, and you're going to have people coming up more quickly into these areas, and you're going to have displacement of people by AI in jobs that are today maybe for the last 10 years have been thought of to be pretty safe and a refuge against it. So I think in the short term, everybody oversells what a technology will do, and they underestimate the impact of it, 5 years in the future. And I think AI is in the same space, right? You'll hear people overselling what it's doing today and dramatically missing how transformative it's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. I mean, the Trump administration is uh, 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 he gave, I think he offered, I think it was 500 million to the state of Texas for their AI infrastructure. So that's where the AI hub is being built, more or less. And I believe the towns are um, St. Austin, or I'm sorry, Austin, Dallas, and then Albion, I think is the other one. And with that as well, they're also, funding these programs for AI in the universities for medical, to come up with the vaccines quicker. So it goes along with what you're saying. People are not, they're seeing what everything is AI, take this class, take this, all over, social media, but they're not really seeing what 5 years down the line and the capability of it, and how this artificial intelligence is actually going to be mimicking each person, and learning who they are so they can be able to cater to them, perfectly. So, I mean, it's exciting but scary at the same time, I would say.
Yeah, it is. I think it's both, right? And it's the first time, and I've been an advocate of this, by the way, for more than 5 years, of kind of a lone voice out there saying that AI will eventually displace workers, right? Usually when technologies are being introduced, the trope is that, well, people are just going to have new jobs and different kinds of jobs, and it's all going to be fine. And that's been true ever since the Luddites burned the looms, right, in England to just recently. But now with AI, you will actually, in my opinion, have displaced work. In other words, there's not a net increase in human labor that's going to come from introduction of this technology. And actually, it was until just last year when the European Center for Economic Research actually came out with data that already shows early indications that this is going to be true. So that means we have to be very smart about what we're applying these tools to, and how we're socially going to manage some of the displacement of these things. But when you think about education, the power to fix what's wrong with education in this country, especially the power to, augment those doctors who can, again, help them understand relationships that are far too complex, say, with drugs and diseases and other things that are kind of coming in there elementally. And then being able to do things like analyzing, breast mammograms and being more accurate at diagnosing, cancer than, radiologists are today. So it's going to have a big impact, and it's going to be mostly positive, but we have to be aware of the negative side of these things, and try to, manage that.
Sure. So I'm sure leading a team has its challenges, and you've obviously led plenty of teams in your career. What's your leadership style, and can you give us an example of how it helped you out through a tough spot?
Yeah, leadership again is something I've studied since I was a young officer in the Air Force, and in fact, when I was at Goodrich Aerospace, I helped found the Goodrich Leadership Academy. So we actually made a week-long immersive experience to help managers transition from thinking about managing people to leading people, right? And so that's how committed I am to that process, and it was so successful. Eventually, it was adopted by all of Goodrich and taught at the Military Academy at West Point. While I was there, and for a while after the acquisition by United Technologies. But what I think is a good example of leadership might be my first day on the job when I went to Hitachi, and this was going back into the early '90s. It was literally my first day on the job. I woke up to a little roll in California, which is like, hey, that could have been an earthquake, small here or big down south. So I called my wife to make sure she was okay. She was fine with the baby down in Orange County. I was up near Simi Valley, and I said, okay, well, great. I drive into work, and I was sleeping in a house with no bed, no furniture, no dishes, nothing. So I couldn't feel anything. Right? To me, it was just nothing. Drove to work, pulled up. My boss is standing in front of the building with water pouring down the stairs. He's sitting in his sweatshirt and a leather jacket, and he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "First day." And it was obviously, this was the day of the Northridge earthquake, right? And the building had been devastated. And I literally waded into that building and got the blueprints and started. I did $250,000 of verbal contracts with contractors that first day, right? And that business didn't lose a shipment that month, or they stayed on track for all the work we did. But what was amazing was, from a personal point of view, leadership point of view, I learned more about that team in a week than you would normally learn in a year or two of working with people. You learned immediately who you could delegate something to and say, hey, there's water in that, that aisle, go clean it up. And by the way, and you come back and it's not done. And they say, well, there's no buckets, there's no mops. Well, go to Home Depot and buy some, right? Or you
Right.
go somewhere else and the person's already said, well, I didn't have this, so I couldn't fix the hole. So I backed a truck up against the thing to keep people out. It's like, good job. So that was that engagement with people and learning to connect with people early on and find out what their nature is, right? Really is transformational. And the sooner you can do that, the more engaged you can be, the more effective leader you can be. And that starts with really listening and being, empathetic in terms of what's going on in their lives, what's happening, and learning to listen, which is a skill too few leaders develop early in their careers.
Absolutely. I agree with that. That's a skill that a lot of people have a hard time with. It's a simple skill. Just listen. If you listen, they will tell you everything, so, and not to mention, I mean, learning everybody's personality, what they are good at and what they aren't good at, being in a situation like that under pressure, it really brings out kind of like a survival mode in people, and you quickly know who you need to guide. When you delegate things, you have to constantly give them steps, and then there's the ones that they're off to the races, and they just know what to do and take care of handle business, I suppose. So how do you encourage your team to think outside the box and bring new ideas to the table?
Well, I think you do that by having a culture of not trying to be the smartest guy in the room, right? And I've seen situations where leaders who are incredibly brilliant, right, and very insightful, speak too soon, be too strong opinionated, and example might be we're all sitting around the table and the boss says, well, I just interviewed this new HR director. I loved her. I think she's great. We should hire her. What do you think? Right, going around the table. Well, the boss has already decided, right? You're not going to get that input. And so again, it comes back to, if you're going to have engagement from people, you got to create the space for people to contribute, and you have to listen. And so I've always been an advocate of having more people at the table, listen to more of that, and be the last to speak on these subjects, right? You should never vary on your values or your ethics about what you're going to do as a leader, but you better be quiet enough to listen to everybody else's points of view, because otherwise you're just operating by yourself. And you better hope you're the smartest person in the room, because you're the only one that's going to be running the business, right? Versus getting that leverage of N+1 minds that come together to solve problems. And so listening and not speaking too soon, critically important.
Absolutely. Curious about this. So what's a day in your life look like, and how do you juggle work and everything else?
Well, my life today is quite different than it was, say, a couple of years ago when I was chairman, CEO, and serving on boards, et cetera. It was a lot more concentrated. Today, I really tried to find more balance, since I retired as chairman, CEO of RealWare. So I now do board service. I'm on a number of boards. I do writing. I do my own podcast, the Connected Workers Podcast. Thanks for plugging that earlier. And so for me, I try to work 3 days a week of learning, executing, doing the kinds of things that you would expect. A couple days a week where I try to, like the Thursday, Friday, I really try to hold those for, doing fun, working, doing golf, working in my workshop, getting the honey-do list done. And then fitness. I start every morning after I have a cup of tea with my wife. I'm in the gym working out and, coming together. So this is a stage in life where it really is it's the marathon now, right? It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
So you build the kind of lifestyle where you can read and learn and give back, which I consider board service an element of giving back to organizations, and keep learning and developing. But no one slid into their grave wishing they had another day in the office.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, it's nice to hear that you're enjoying the fruits of your labor. And then why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do in your workshop? So I found that very neat.
Well, it's as I said earlier, I was a physicist, so I did a lot of starting work in solids and material science. I worked for Schick Wilkinson Sword as head of quality and then operations, and so they were still making swords when I was there in Acton, England, right? So they're still making swords in the same equipment, the same thing they had done, for a couple hundred years, right? So, that was extremely fascinating to me. I'm a third degree brown belt in modern Arnis, which is Filipino stick and sword fighting. So I have an interest in like the implements themselves, and then the science behind how do you create that. And so for me, I like to take a piece of metal, forge it into a tool, and make it beautiful and functional. So it's something that I enjoy doing, but it's one that kind of pulls together all the elements again of a little bit of patience, a little bit of science, a little bit of art that ends up being very, very practical.
Very nice. Very nice. So how do you tackle learning new things, especially stuff that's outside of your comfort zone?
Well, today it's so much easier to learn than it ever was, right? I've been a learning geek since I was a kid. I worked through the encyclopedias, I think, from A to Z before I was done with third grade. I was the kid that was in the library in the summer break, right? I'd ride my bicycle to the public library or later on to the university library and spend the summers in there reading. So today, now you can access literally everything you want, on the internet where you can see. Now you have to be judicious about where and get you this information, but now there's so much more you can do in terms of learning a language or, getting access to data, remembering a factoid, that you came across. So for me, I use every tool available to me. I use a lot of AI when it comes to trying to research companies in terms of what I'm going to interview. If I'm going to be working with somebody, I will you start with their LinkedIn. You start with their social profiles. You then expand out into their business. And so to me, it's learning is something I devote a good portion of every day to.
That's wonderful. So let me ask you this. So obviously, it sounds like you've had a great career and now you're reaping the rewards of your career. And as you said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. As you're looking towards the future, how do you create passive income, or if you have invested in the past?
Well, I think the decision to create income is something that you have to make early in your career, right? It's like time is your friend when it comes to building wealth. And one of the things I did, I used to do this for Oregon State. I would go in and volunteer when I was on the advisory board for the School of Manufacturing, Industrial Manufacturing, and Engineering, and go talk to their students about creating a life plan. And literally, you start with putting this graph together and say, okay, what is, and it's going to be on log scale paper, right? So you start off like, your age on one level, and then you start talking about what income you're going to be making, right? So you start with the dollars as you think about that, and then you think about what proportion you can save and invest, and you give some assumptions around that. And if you force yourself to do that, starting in your 20s and looking forward, pretty soon you begin to see that, living paycheck to paycheck is not going to be something that gets you ahead. Whereas you begin to think about living below your means, helping people understand that in life you're paid in arrears. You work harder than everybody else. You give more results than everybody else. So you're underpaid. But your reward is that promotion, that next bigger job, et cetera, which then gives you more income that you can live below the line and begin to invest that, right? And so that's the key to me is really, you can never, just like you can never over-exercise what you eat, right? You can't eat all you want, exercise, especially as we get older. But the same thing is you can't, save or invest faster than you spend, right? So the first thing is that discipline to live below your means, think about how you do that, and then lay it out and make the plan. And whether that's going to be a career where you devote it to government, or it's a career that you devote to industry, or it's a career of a serial entrepreneur, you still have to make that idea of how do I put this money in place, whether I'm buying real estate, whether I'm buying assets, and that's something that most people don't think about until they're too far down the path, and they realize that buying the fast car or the fancy stuff or the health club membership or whatever it might be and not investing that in assets that are going to pay you back in years later where the time comes into an advantage. So that's my biggest advice is make that life plan.
Sure. So what's on the horizon for you? Any big goals or projects you're excited about?
Well, I'm working on a couple different books, so that'll be something that'll be fun to work out. One's a novel, one is more functional around the kind of work I'm doing today. So that's exciting. It keeps me focused here. And then it's really about driving this idea of adoption in the Connected Workers podcast. I talk with all of these industry leaders out there. I was just at the oil offshore technology conference in Houston. All these companies thinking about how they're building and employing technology to advance their productivity, taking that and say, there's tools out there that are available today that people aren't using, and getting people to have that fear of missing out and adopt some of these technologies. They're ready to make a difference today on safety and productivity. So for me, that passion of helping companies, and you mentioned my work in innovation and technology, I always like trying to bring that from maybe someday to you can deploy this today and make a difference. And so for me, that's really exciting. I spend a lot of time trying to make that a reality.
Sure. So has there been a book, a podcast, or someone that's really changed your outlook or approach?
Well, I got to make a plug for my friend Jeff Brown, who does the Read to Lead podcast. I have listened to that forever. That is one that I would recommend to anyone because there's so many good books. We talked about learning models before. You can't read all the books that are out there, but when you have somebody who curates, and finds authors of significance who make works that make a difference, and you can pick that up, and his tagline is "Leaders read and readers lead." That's kind of the thing that goes with that. So I think that's really important. I think that. One of the books that I always recommend to people when they think about this is The Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It goes way back to the 30s. It's a tough read today, especially if you're a woman or something, because it's written in the language of the 30s, right? So it doesn't feel as inclusive as it might. But boy, the principles are timeless, right? In terms
what is the name of that Napoleon Hill book again?
Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he also wrote a bunch of others. If you ever heard the speech, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, that Roosevelt did during the Great Depression. Napoleon Hill wrote that line for him.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Huh. So it's an idea of how you can, 13 principles that you can apply to your life that really can change, how you see your interaction with the world. And it's an important concept.
Sure. There was a Napoleon Hill audio that I listened to where he interviews the devil.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, that you'll have to look that one up. I cannot think of the name of it, but it's fascinating. I mean, the questions he asks, and just the devil's answers, and I mean, and this was written as back in the 20s or 30s or what have you, and it truly is where the world is at today. With
I'm gonna have to look at that. I know that Paul Harvey, the radio host back in the 70s, did something on if the devil ran things or whatever, right? But that's which is also a good listen. But I'm gonna have to find that one that you're referencing.
I came across it on Spotify, so definitely listen to that one. I think you'll enjoy that one. It's an interesting Q&A with the devil and Napoleon Hill questioning him. So it was really neat. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on. I really enjoyed having you on. So if anyone wanted to get a hold of you or listen to your podcast, how do they connect with you?
Well, really easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn at Andrew Chrostowski. My name just concatenated, no dot. So look me up there. I'm on X at Connected Andrew. So follow me on X, right? I do talk about leadership and future of work and all these things that we're talking about. And then the podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or you can go to the Connected Workers, oggn.com/connected workers. And we're part of the Oil and Gas Global Network's 20 plus podcasts that are out there in the world. So any of those ways. And I look forward, please reach out. If you've mentioned this show, I'll be sure to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, you guys. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Driven, the Unscripted Success podcast. Want to share your story? Apply to be a guest at drivensuccesspodcast.com/guest.